The original Digimon adventure is a commentary about how digital technology had begun to reshape the modern world. The illustration of an alien planet hidden within a digital network and filled with monstrous creatures was analogous to an impending future defined by technological progress. Those ideas would be further cemented and refined in what would become the third season of the Digimon series, Digimon Tamers, written by 𝗖𝗄𝘁𝗃 Konaka. For Konaka, creating Digimon Tamers was an act of expanding upon many of the themes established in Digimon Adventure. In this and other videos, I will be attempting to look at Digimon Tamers with regard to the effect that modern technology has had on humanity, and why Digimon Tamers can be seen as a story about the times we live in. Alongside my analysis, I'll also be referring to publications by one Richard Stivers, addressing the topic of technology in culture, literature, and society. The first beat of the show features a computer screen tracking signals, which indicate strange creatures abroad, scurrying about the barrier between the real and digital worlds. Incidentally, these creatures have begun to cross over from their world into ours. This is the analogy for the 21st century, this embrace of a technological reality that will indeed pervade our very existence. Here, Tamers prophetically establishes what largely defines a milieu specifically being a cultural climate. In this case, the cultural climate is technology, superbly illustrated through analogy. Artificial constructs called digital monsters, or Digimon, have become self-sentient, and by some strange means they can now walk about our world, set apart from the digital manifestations from where they were conceived. Following a short battle between two of these rampaging kaiju, a miniature Digimon named 𝗂𝗄𝗄 is ousted from the digital world and finds itself in Tokyo, Japan. And that battle that just occurred in the digital world, or rather on the barrier, coincides with that of a child's card game played between two boys at a playground. In the real world, Digimon exist as a consumer product, a friendly game between two of these kids. A gritty battle where a living creature loses its life is then thrown into the cushion of a child's card game. This is key to understanding the morality of Digimon Tamers. Aspects such as pain, suffering, and death have been turned into abstract constructs by means of modern technology.
弱肉強食、それが彼らのルールなんだ。だけどデジモンは本当の生き物じゃない。ゲームなんだ。だから気にすることはないんだよ、ジェンリャ。
Now, similar themes have come up in other works by Konaka, specifically in Serial Experiments Lane.
レインがプログラム。アリスだって誰だってみんなアプリケーションでしかないの。
違うよ。
え？
こんなに冷たいけど、でも生きてるよ、レインの体。私だって、ほら。ね。ドキ、ドキ、
ドキ、ドキ、ドキ、ドキ。
Tamers and Lane are stories about how the upward mobility of modern technology has drastically affected our lives and our livelihoods. Humanity is changing rapidly and to a terrifying degree. Much of that is due how technology shoves society to and fro. For the sake of clarity, when I talk about modern technology, I'm not simply referring to constructs such as personal computers, cellular phones, motor vehicles, etc. Modern technology is actually more than an environment made of plastic, glass, steel, and concrete. Rather, what these physical materials do is far more important to understand when realizing how modern technology is our new natural environment. Richard Stivers refers to French historian and sociologist Jacques Ellul, who derived the word technology from the word technique. Technique very simply refers to a method of doing anything. For example, I want to be someplace that is 3 miles away from me. I could get there by walking, of course, but maybe I would rather use a bicycle instead, to get there quicker. In either case, walking or riding a bike, the technique is the act of moving from one place to another. But the bike would be technology, as technology is generally whatever method I had used to make the technique more efficient. That is what technology is, any method that has been rationally arrived at that increases the efficiency of any human activity. And so a bicycle makes movement more efficient, and where a bicycle may be limited, perhaps a motorcycle would be more preferable, perhaps a car, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, technology does not simply exist within the ether. It must be made. Technology only exists because human hands ensure that it can exist. Raw materials exist in nature, but those must be collected, broken down, built, and then made to function according to specific designs. Those designs can only come about based on a fundamental understanding of the natural world. And therefore, technology largely represents our capacity to harness and manipulate nature itself. The point of all that is also key to understanding why digital monsters work well analogously to modern technology. Another aspect which I shall go in greater detail in future videos is the fact that Konaka also uses specific digital monsters as a means of representing a melding of ancient myth with modern day. In other words, of the variety of monsters the children meet throughout the show, some are based on creatures of pantheon, particularly those of Japanese origin. These monsters largely represent this underlying irrationality to modern technology. For even though humanity has achieved much through modern technology, there still exists a primal nature to modern tech that could very well do us harm. Modern technology is both a means to life and a threat to life. Ideally, we look to modern tech as having the potential to solve all our problems and make our lives easier. We can travel faster, we can cure a variety of illnesses, we can communicate at long distances, we can put people in space and even on the moon. But we cannot deny that wars are also fought with all manner of modern weapons. Our technology also has the propensity to pollute the natural environment, causing all manner of health issues to living creatures. Moreover, people can use technology as a means to spread lies through mass media, propagating false narratives. Admittedly, people use technology for great things, but technology can also be used to create monsters, and those monsters must be tamed, if not destroyed outright. So this is the fundamental analogy. It's how one can readily understand what Digimon Tamers is all about. By taming these monsters, we tame ourselves. Now, the story of Digimon Tamers will largely be told through the perspective of a young boy named Takato Matsuda. Takato is a bit clumsy, and in a rush to get to class, he accidentally spills a box of his playing cards. Amidst the pile, Takato spots an outlandish blue card that he's never seen before. Curiously, he collects the card and tries swiping it through his handheld scanner. This causes the machine to spark and fizzle erratically, and Takato leaps back in astonishment. Before he can investigate further, however, the chime of the school bell urges him to run to class. The school setting is also symbolic, by the way, although what it represents is more general than the themes I've mentioned so far concerning technology. Specifically, a school is a learning institution which implies an authoritative structure and societal purpose. The objective of a public school is, or should be, to teach people how to live and function in society. It's a simulation of a larger world, and how one performs in school can also be a measure of how one will perform in a broad environment. Now, for all intents and purposes, Tokyo City largely represents the world as a whole. The modern world that is continuing to evolve into a technological utopia, or at the very least, hopes to evolve into such. When you see the masses of people walking about the streets of Tokyo, the idea one should ascertain is that everyone is engaged in various pursuits that all cultivate to create the modern era. The point that I'm getting at is that a school setting is often used as a background in a variety of other media, including a lot of anime, for one simple reason. It is a microcosm for the world itself. A common trope in anime is to have one's main character sitting near a window, looking outside longingly because they feel trapped. They want to go out and play and be free, not be beleaguered by their responsibilities. There's a will to retreat from the crowd, which is also why we see Ruki set apart from the masses and listening to her music on her headphones. In a sense, school is a prison for the body, the mind, and even the soul, and therefore the setting serves as the perfect environment for any number of dramatic circumstances. This is also somewhat illustrated with Takato's classmates having a laugh at his expense here, marking him as somewhat of an outcast. Takato's tardiness rewards him with having to stand in the hall outside his class, which he resents, of course. And although he is apologetic, boredom soon takes over and he begins sketching something on a notepad. He draws a picture and then starts filling in information about a Digimon he imagined seemingly on the spur of the moment. Unfortunately, his doodling lands him into even more trouble, and he's made to stay after school. Yet not even that deters him from finishing his little project. While one might assume Takato's inattention to his academics proves that he is mischievous or rebellious, that isn't the case at all. This is simply one of the ways that Takato, as a mere child, has learned how to function within a world in transition. As I mentioned before, public schooling is a microcosm of the world around him, based in and ruled by modern technology. He is adapting to it as best he can, and so his want to draw pictures of fantastic creatures is how he attends to an impending reality. And note his reaction when his teacher, Nami Asunuma, catches him right in the middle of his artistic endeavors. Rather than try to hide what he was doing, Takato initially tries to correct his teacher about her misconception, and then he suddenly becomes aware of himself. Like I said, 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀 isn't inattentive due to a spirit of misbehavior. Rather, his energies are focused on applying a rationale to something that is seemingly irrational. So while 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀 may not hold an interest in the common academic pursuits laid down by a school setting, he does show that he is intelligent, and even somewhat artistic. He doesn't simply want to draw a picture of a monster here, he wants that monster to have a significant amount of peripheral detail. The notepad therefore contains even more information by which a fictional monster can be made real. At least real in 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀's mind, and this is reality out of fantasy. And so 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀's want to instill a logic behind Guillemon's conception means that he has a desire to make sense of things around him. With regard to any concepts within an artistic medium, one will eventually have to acknowledge and talk about meaning. The caveat to this acknowledgement is that meaning implies there's actually an inherent structure that governs all art. And that's where you'll see discussions arise concerning subjective and objective art, but I won't go into that here. What's important is that the additive details to Guillemon's creation show that 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀 readily applies a basis to his art. In other words, he's giving meaning to his creation. Meaning as best he knows and understands it. This is yet another reason why Digimon Tamers is a kids show made for adults. 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀 is a child, but he wants to apply the logic of an adult world to what is otherwise a childish fantasy. If you take a dragon, for instance, a creature of myth and legend, stories tell of fire-breathing dragons. The concept, when applied to reality, seems silly, of course, and then you learn about how fire is made, then you also discover animals like the bombardier beetle. When you consider it, fire requires a chemical reaction, and knowing what those chemicals are would aid in one's ability to rationalize how any creature might issue flames from its body. You can further explore this idea using an example from another popular monster franchise, Nintendo's Pokemon. Let's examine Pikachu for a moment. Pikachu is a yellow rodent who stores energy and releases it through 2 red marks on its cheeks. True enough, a mouse firing bolts of lightning is pretty out there, right? Yet the franchise goes so far as to establish a set of rules based on how electricity works in reality. The understanding that electricity can be grounded by the earth leads to the conception that rock-type Pokemon are naturally resistant to lightning types. And so you have a fantasy, but it's tempered by reality. Obviously, none of this is to say that fantasy is reality, rather that the tenets of one's fantasy must exist in a state where they are bound by the limitations of reality. That may sound ironic, but the only way to understand fantasy is to have it be based in reality. But the concepts of reality within Pokemon are only stretched so far. If one considers the vulnerability of water types to electric types, for example, that idea isn't as based in reality as it might seem. In reality, lightning doesn't actually travel through water. Rather, the minerals dissolved in natural water and pool water are actually what are responsible for electrical conductivity. However, those details aren't accounted for in the Pokemon franchise because the franchise is a game tailored according to the rules of a zero-sum game, rock, paper, scissors. Now, a more robust Pokemon world might involve societies whose people regularly use electric types for, say, creating distilled water, and then selling it on the market. That is to say, if the goal was to make Pokemon more than just a franchise about blood sports, and that's just a small example of how one could make that work. I know this is a long tangent, but there is a point to all of it. Media made for children needs to make sense. Now, often when people criticize a story's elements not making any sense, the objection will be met with the refrain that the story doesn't make sense because it is made for children. But that's just an excuse for lazy writing. The argument actually should be that media made for children need not be so complex as children are unable to understand it. Tenets more generally understood by a child but could be later broken down into their particulars by an adult. And that's all deconstructed here, in this moment. Of particular note is the fact that 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀 purposefully makes Guillemon a virus attribute, as opposed to a vaccine or data type. Incidentally, the partner Digimon given to the children of Digimon Adventure were all either vaccine or data types. Virus type was most often the given attribute of the show's villains. However, as Ogremon exemplified, not all virus types were heinous. Ultimately, what's implied by 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝘀's dialogue is that Guillemon was supposed to be a grittier and edgier version of Agumon, and the virus attribute is all part and parcel to that. Guillemon is set up to be an anti-hero of sorts, which will be ironic given where the story goes, but a further implication is 𝗗𝗏𝘄𝑀's own human nature, which is haphazardly infused within Guillemon's design. And this is the age-old theme of the monster within us all, hiding within the depths of our souls, staring into the abyss until the abyss stares back at us, etc., etc. There's something primal within us that attracts us to bestial things. There are a variety of wild animals that boast a barbarous strength. And so if 𝗏𝗂 is to tame any beast, he wants his to be as wild and savage as it can be. The want to transcend has been illustrated by Aesop's fables and draws from a general human aptitude to anthropomorphize animals or animal qualities. The strength or cunning displayed by various beasts in the wild are examples of enviable attributes and are well worth emulation. But they play on an innate human desire to seek a higher state of being. That desire to transcend is also something I had mentioned about Luke Skywalker's incarnation in Return of the Jedi. Incidentally, this is also why origin stories for various comic book characters are compelling as well. Going from zero to hero plays on this desire. Now, of course, 𝗏𝗂 was not fully aware of the implications of his drawings here in this manner, but this is the method by which he will eventually transcend, and that journey will fill the bulk of the story of Digimon Tamers. Of interest here is the fact that this transcendence occurs vicariously. That's also a theme somewhat played out in the Pokemon franchise. What I mean is that as the children go on their journey, their progress is played out in visual detail through their monster partners. Compare this with, say, a character who transforms due to some radioactive mutation in various comic books, or like what happens in a Mahou Shoujo franchise. The transformation is made clearly evident by physical changes, but also because the character will wear an elaborate costume. Maybe they'll also adopt a new identity. Within the Digimon franchise, however, there's a third party involved. The growth of the children is made evident through the transformations of the monsters that they have been partnered with. The reason this works so well in a story about the rise of modern technology is that many people today do indeed live vicariously through various online identities. The people or monsters we make ourselves out to be on social media, in other words. And here you can think of anyone who creates a new identity or persona online. A good example of this is the fact that some of you may refer to me as Rusty because my YouTube channel name is Rusty Cheese Knife, but I have put my real name on a couple of my videos. You've seen it. You can call me Sam. That's my real name. Something important to keep in mind throughout Tamers is that the Digimon are people. When 𝗏𝗂 creates 𝗗𝗄, he isn't just building something completely artificial. 𝗗𝗄 is just as much a person as 𝗏𝗏 is. And when I say person, I don't mean human. Rather, person is a term for any creature that can be regarded as an individual. To further elaborate, 𝗗𝗄's very conception is, and must be, based on everything laid out by 𝗏𝗏's notepad. In essence, this means that what makes up 𝗗𝗄's data is in fact 𝗏𝗏 himself. And given that 𝗏𝗏 is 𝗗𝗄's creator, this also makes 𝗏𝗏 a kind of father. And so 𝗗𝗄 has essentially taken on some of 𝗏𝗏's own traits, but has also taken on other details that 𝗏𝗏 has inherited from his parents, his friends, his teachers, and so on. This detail is important with regard to the fact that Japan for many years now has been facing a declining birth rate. And very much so I feel that Konaka is trying to address that issue through Tamers, which is why some of the Digimon partners function like descendants of the human children, or indeed descendants of humanity in general. And I'll endeavor to explain this analogy in greater detail in further episodes. So at long last, 𝗏𝗏 adds some finishing touches to his creation. Then cue a barking dog getting in 𝗏𝗏's face. His reverie is broken yet again, but this time to a homemade hand puppet held by a young girl named Juri Kato. Juri is one of 𝗏𝗏's classmates, and she also happens to admire him. Of particular importance is the fact that she introduces herself here through a hand puppet. She doesn't interact with 𝗏𝗏 face to face. Now, I won't go into much detail about what this means here and now, only to say that Juri's antics are more than just childish whims. There's an iceberg to unpack as far as Juri is concerned, and many who are deeply familiar with Digimon Tamers will know exactly what I mean. And then we shift directly to the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building, a symbol of Japan's corporate or bureaucratic world. In a sense, the authority imposed by the public school setting will be further exemplified by that of the TMG building, as it towers ominously over the surrounding city. Moreover, the TMG building is a symbol of the triumph of technology. Its very design was made to emulate the appearance of a computer circuit. Furthermore, we encounter the character Mitsuo Yamaki and his secret organization, Hypnos. Now, Yamaki shares some similarities with the character Gendo Ikari of Neon Genesis Evangelion, namely his rigid stoicism hiding a more sinister underbelly. As for Hypnos, it represents technology as a means of constraint, law, and order. Ironically, however, the name Hypnos is based in mythology. Greek mythology illustrates Hypnos as the god of sleep or the god of dreams. This is also an interesting detail with regard to the show's theme song, Biggest Dreamer. And incidentally, the word hypnosis is also derived from the name Hypnos. Now, this is a bit on the nose as far as Konaka's writing goes, but there's also further potential to be found from its reference to the Cthulhu mythos. Without going into much detail about the book itself, like much of Lovecraft's works, the reader will encounter the existential terrors of the unknowable. cosmic horror, and that all fits into Lovecraft's themes of infinity and the futility of everything. Intentionally or not, through Yamaki in particular and the Japanese secret government, Konaka will illustrate the same kind of human futility that marks many of Lovecraft's works. Yet what's truly respectable about Konaka in this regard, in high contrast with Lovecraft, or even let's take some modern Japanese writers for example, such as Hideaki Anno, or even Junji Ito, is that Konaka predicates all his futility on the prospect of hope. There's a light at the end of the abyss, in other words. And that may be an immense detractor or detractor depending on the kind of person you are. Anyway, speaking of sleep, that naturally occurs at night or during the dark, and so appropriately many Digimon incursions into the real world occur late into the evening. And the Digimon incursion in this instance is that of 𝗬𝗲𝗄. And the entire sequence with the blue card that 𝗬𝗗𝗄 found earlier has caused grandiose shifts about Tokyo's infrastructure as digital technology and reality continue to merge. 𝗬𝗗𝗄's card reader, which had recently malfunctioned, undergoes a physical transformation, which he witnesses, becoming a brand new piece of technology, an ARC. A handheld machine that links each child to his or her respective Digimon partner. The ARC also serves as an encyclopedic interface as well, very much like the Pokédex of the Pokemon franchise. And this is all a clear analogy for any electronic interface, most prominently a cellular phone. Far beyond being a means of long-distance communication, a cell phone also gives one access to social media, which contains a variety of network services. Access to photo and video sharing gives one a means to transcend, to go beyond one's physical limitations. You could take a selfie or make a quick video online that completely revamps who and what you are in reality. This is all where you look at the concept of digital monsters, and all the pieces start coming together. And so, in retrospect, making a story about artificial creatures living inside the internet is a pretty obvious choice for a milieu of technology. No different than what the Wachowskis did when they created The Matrix back in 1999.
Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
At nightfall, 𝗬𝗗𝗄 arrives home and awkwardly greets his parents before he rushes up to his bedroom to inspect his newfound gadget. The Matsuda family, as it is revealed here, own a humble bread-making business in the middle of Shinjuku. When 𝗬𝗗𝗄 gets home, his mother Yoshie is very dismissive, and she makes it clear that 𝗬𝗗𝗄's antics at school are well known to her. Meanwhile, 𝗬𝗗𝗄's father, Takahiro, remains silent as he assumes a confused look on his face. Much more will be expounded upon these characters in due course. For now, 𝗬𝗗𝗄's investigations reveal that the blue card he discovered has disappeared, having seemingly been replaced by this strange gadget. Given his knowledge of the franchise, 𝗬𝗗𝗄 rightfully assumes that the tech is a Digivice. Summarily, 𝗬𝗗𝗄 takes to swiping his notepad into the groove of the device, although why that would be his first instinct isn't made quite clear. Nevertheless, the fact that the pages get stuck within the groove may very well illustrate that the current state of the digital world may not have been readily able to account for the bulk of information mounted by 𝗬𝗗𝗄's notepad. Yet later on, the Digivice indulges in 𝗬𝗗𝗄's creativity and compiles the data supplied, which shall serve as the template for an entirely original creature. And when the upload is complete, the image of a pulsing egg appears on the screen of the Digivice, which 𝗬𝗗𝗄 recognizes immediately. 𝗬𝗗𝗄's Digimon partner is encased inside, preparing to hatch. Sometime after he falls asleep, 𝗬𝗗𝗄 dreams. Within his dreams, he finds his body floating above the ground outside. And there he's witness to a young girl using her own Digivice, Digimon cards, and of course, her own Digimon partner to fight another Digimon. If one refers to Lovecraft's Hypnos, this gives one a better idea as to why 𝗬𝗗𝗄 was allowed this window into what was going on here, even though he's supposedly asleep in bed at this time. And as due Konaka's penchant for the Cthulhu mythos, undoubtedly there are some aspects about Digimon Tamers that probe the nature of reality.
What is real? How do you define real? You think that's air you're breathing now?
But later on the show, we'll have 𝗬𝗗𝗄 and his friends leaving the current realm of space, time, and dimensions, and traveling to the digital world. Undoubtedly, whatever means caused the birth of 𝗬𝗲𝗄 and the physical emergence of Digimon in general may also have had a hand in allowing 𝗬𝗗𝗄 to go beyond the limits here, and appear as some kind of ghost in a place far away from his physical body. And indeed, as I had mentioned earlier, dreaming is also baked into the show's theme song. After his dream, 𝗬𝗗𝗄 awakens, and given the vividness of that dream, he questions whether or not it actually happened. He then opens his bedroom window to look outside, and there he finds his father cleaning bread trays. Poignantly, he asks his father if Digimon are real, but then soon refrains from further conversation when his father becomes confused. Takado stops himself short in fear of ridicule for his interest in this fantasy. And naturally, he's afraid his father will react in the same manner as his homeroom teacher, or even his mother, due his investiture in something as strange or childish as digital monsters. Ironic about this is that Takado's father hails from the same generation that brought him such technological wonders that he enjoys today. And while Takahiro may not know anything about digital monsters, or maybe not even much about digital technology in general, his attitude entails there is a willingness to engage his son with keen interest in whatever Takado would have to say about such things. Now, future events will prove that Takado should have confided in his father about his discoveries, about the blue car, the Digivice, and about 𝗖𝗄𝘁. However, Takado is but a child, timid and lacking the wisdom of his father, and so he does not confide in him. Whatever visions he received the night before have led him to conclude that digital monsters are actually the real deal, and he's due his own chance to become partners with one of them. And so summarily, Takado does decide to rely on himself and investigate this mystery on his own. Now, when Takado reveals the truth to his friends, they don't believe him, and that's understandable. In the wake of such serious events as the world itself undergoing massive changes, these skeptics will be keen at keeping the ball from hitting the net. Of particular interest is that when Takado tries to recount his experience by remarking on the rain hitting his body, the other boys mock him as if he's just a child who wet the bed. No one can further analogize Takado's experience with what was conveyed in the Matrix. Again, what is and isn't real? And as we know, Takado readily accepts that his experience was wholly real, while his friends just shrug it off as a childish dream. In comparison to the Matrix, this shows that Takado has fully accepted the red pill, while his friends still exist within a blue-pilled world. And Digimon are just childish fantasies. They have no relevance outside card games enacted on a school playground. The juxtaposition is obviously ironic. Takado is mocked for being a child when he readily accepts the reality that he experienced. The truth in this case is stranger than fiction. Now, Takado's friends readily depart after having their laugh, leaving him to question himself. Now, I should mention that Takado's friends, Kazu and Kenta, are not being purposely malicious. They're just boys being boys. And Takado isn't a loner either. He isn't made subject to bullying because he's some kind of social outcast or anything. Now, Kanaka doesn't really play on those tropes here. Takado really is just a normal kid. He may be awkward, but he is accepted by others and he does have friends. Now, they may not be very good friends, but they're certainly not bad friends. Anyway, at that moment, he's alerted by his Digivice that the egg which conjured itself the night before has hatched. His Digivice henceforth allows him to track the location of his Digimon partner, soon to appear in the real world. 𝗖𝗄𝘁's arrival is due to take place in close proximity to the TMG building, and to himself, Takado ominously proclaims that something is definitely beginning. And indeed, this is a unique moment with implications he hasn't even begun to fathom. A creature he had just imagined the day before is about to become a very real thing. Takado races amidst crowds of unsuspecting locals walking about Tokyo, everyone around completely unaware that something amazing is about to take place. Well, mostly everyone anyway. There are a few who take notice, most likely due to the fact that they themselves are already partnered with Digimon. Takado's trek to 𝗖𝗄𝘁's spawn point involves crawling around in the gutter, and incidentally, his upper lip becomes coated with dirt in semblance of a mustache. It's a symbol of male adolescence, a sign that he is entering into adulthood. At some kind of construction site, Takado finds an aperture linking the digital world with the real world. He then makes his way down into a large hole, and upon arriving, is witness to 𝗖𝗄𝘁's materialization. Nervously, Takado attempts to introduce himself, only to bear witness as 𝗖𝗄𝘁 obliterates a couple of rats scurrying around in the distance. And this is leagues different from the kind of introduction that 𝗖cie and even his friends received when they fell into the digital world. 𝗖𝗄𝘁 is inherently bestial and seemingly capricious, and soon the red reptile becomes aware of Takado's presence and faces him with unknown intent. The episode ends on that hanger. As this story unfolds, one shall see that many of the more generalized themes and concepts of Digimon adventure have seeped into Digimon Tamers, where they will become far more specific, although they shall also become more complex. And that's how deconstruction usually works. The paradigm we're dealing with here is modern technology, and how that has largely become the new environment. In ancient times, the world was ruled by nature, but now, in modern times, nature has largely been harnessed by humanity. Now, does that mean we are necessarily free of nature's tyranny? No, of course not. In fact, human beings are just as, if not more tyrannical than nature itself. And so the tyranny of this new nature will take its form in that of modern technology. That's where the monsters are. Now, while 𝗏𝗀𝗃 might say that Lovecraft isn't in Tamers, the story does involve a bit of staring into the abyss. The abyss that most surely is a reflection of the heart of humanity. In semblance of the wild, Digimon technology is largely untamed and unruly and warrants further subjugation and understanding. However, this new frontier must be conquered, and it will be conquered primarily by 𝗏𝗃𝗄𝗏's generation. This is their time. And in a sense, 𝗏𝗃𝗄 might even subliminally realize this, hence his lack of reliance upon his father. His father attends to a humble stature. He's a baker making bread for residents in Tokyo. And yet at the same time, what 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏 does not realize is that he is still his father's son, and therefore bears particulars that were set down by his father's generation, and those particulars will further extend to 𝗗𝗄𝗄 and others. That's some of what indicates that Digimon partners are in essence descendants of the human children. With regard to what I said earlier about Japan's declining birth rate, one may be able to glean a commentary about 𝗏𝗃𝗄𝗏's own desire to replenish those numbers. 𝗏𝗃𝗄𝗏 also superbly illustrates what hurdles the Japanese people face through characters like 𝗖𝗵𝘁, who represents the overbearing hand of technocratic power and authority. What makes 𝗖𝗵𝘁 interesting with this regard is 𝗏𝗃𝗄𝗏 doesn't simply set him up as playing antagonist for the sake of having an antagonist. The world is a complicated stage and involves complicated characters. So while 𝗖𝗵𝘁 and Hypnos represent the modern institution of government, 𝗖𝗵𝘁 also represents the vestiges of an old order. Much of what 𝗖𝗵𝘁 does during the course of Tamers can be labeled very simply as purification, the desire to turn back the clock because the future terrifies us. And what falls to 𝗖𝗵𝘁 here is to safeguard Japan and the Japanese people from the incursions of these monsters. Yet as the story continues, what 𝗖𝗵𝘁 will find is that he cannot stop what is inevitable. A new era is dawning, even as 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏 had indicated. Something almost impossible to imagine is happening. And so if you found you enjoyed this channel's content, give the video a like and subscribe to Rusty Cheese Knife. In addition, you may also support me through Patreon or Cash App, and the links for both may be found in this video's description. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more.